let's bring Sam Khan Jr. on the Matt Mosley Show, the YouTube version. Sam, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. You got a new setup going on here. How's this going so far?
You know, the only thing I miss about radio is the fact that I no cameras, nobody could really see me. I could wear whatever. As you see, I still kind of wear whatever, but I do put on like a collared shirt. You know, I try to look somewhat presentable, but there's some different things about it, but it's been fun. And as you know, I mean, podcasts went from being more of an audio medium, and then overnight, it's like if you didn't have video with it, it wasn't even a podcast, right? It didn't even count. So you've watched this explode, and boy, you do some great podcasting and do a lot of things. And then you and Bruce Feldman wrote this story about DJ Lagway on The Athletic. And Sam, you've documented the Aranda era. You know how Baylor fans feel. And you know the only reason he's the head coach right now is because of the scandal and the weird timing of it, and nobody was around to fire him. And so it's very awkward the way things have kind of ended up at Baylor. This to me feels like a haymaker. This is like Dave Aranda knows he's been given one last opportunity. And again, we can pick it apart. And I know Lagway was inconsistent, and I know all the deficiencies he had at Florida. But what you can't take away from him, Sam, is this was one of the great recruits from 3 or 4 years ago coming out of high school. And from a measurables, ability, upside, whatever you want to call it, this is a pretty dang big deal for the Bears to land him.
Oh, there's no question. He still, for my money, was one of the 10 best transfer quarterbacks available. And the only reason I would put him in the back half of that 10 is because of the inconsistency and the injuries. But if you were grading it on physical talent alone, he's probably number one. Like he's more physically gifted than just about any quarterback you'll run across. And when you guys get to see him in practice in the spring, you're going to see what I'm talking about. Like he is an impressively well put together young man. Like the first time I saw him as a high school recruit, when I believe it was coming out of his junior year, and he was at the Elite 11 regional in Austin. And you watch that with the torque that he throws with, and his size and the arm strength and the velocity that he throws the ball with. And he's just big. He's broad chested. He checks a lot of boxes for what you want in a quarterback. So then becomes the question of why did he struggle at Florida? And I think you pointed out the coaching situation wasn't great. Obviously, a midseason coaching change didn't really work out very well. That team overall struggled as a whole. And this is a chance for a fresh start for him. And I think a really good union between him and Jake Spavital, who has a really decorated history of developing and working with really talented quarterbacks and making them productive. I am of the belief that DJ Lagway will be a 3,000-yard passer next year for Baylor. That's what Sawyer did the last 2 years at Baylor. And if you give Spav some time to work with a guy and he's able to start from the start to finish, then I think you end up with a really productive quarterback, and that's been the history that Spavital's had. So definitely I agree with you, a really big deal, a really big splash for Baylor, and a chance to keep succeeding at a position where that was the one thing you could count on the last couple of years. Once Sawyer Robertson took over, you could count on that, on the quarterback being productive and that part of the team doing well. And I think you add a talent of Lagway's ability and pair it with Spav, and I think you got a chance here to make something special happen.
Now, did the Bears get any kind of a legacy discount? I know sometimes you talk to agents and they want to get the price out there. I asked Derek, who I've known for many years, his dad, and Derek's obviously playing probably the numbers a little closer to the vest. The agents, especially if they feel like they got a great deal, right? They like to get those numbers out there. Can you give us a general idea of where you think this contract came in? And is it you think it's a 2-year deal or like a 1 year with an option kind of thing? How do you think this thing will play out?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I would say that early in his recruitment, from what I heard, was that DJ and his camp were trying to find numbers close to the top of the market at transfer quarterback, which, as we know, with Brendan Sorsby and Josh Hoover, is kind of approaching that $5 million range. It became clear from what I was told that after the first few days of the portal, he probably wasn't going to get that. General managers I talked to around the sport said they probably pegged him for 1.5 to 2 million a year as probably the target range for DJ. I don't know if that's what Baylor ended up giving him, but I know Baylor wouldn't have been able to be in this if this was like a $4 or $5 million recruitment. That's just not the level that they're going to play at for a transfer quarterback. Could they spend 2 on one? Yeah, probably so. I would think they can. And so I don't know what the exact number is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's in that 1.5 to 2 range. Whether or not it's a multi-year deal, I don't know for a fact if it is. But even if it were, multi-year deals at this point really are kind of that in name only, because there really is nothing that can hold a player there. I mean, really, it's just a buyout essentially. If the school decides to structure a buyout into the deal. But, I've talked to agents and talked to general managers, and for the most part, if you do a multi-year deal with somebody, chances are if that player has a really good year, they're going to try to renegotiate after 1 year anyway. So I don't know how germane or how relevant a multi-year deal is, because I mean, we could all be starting over again in a year from now, just because that's the nature of the sport right now, and everybody's pretty much year to year.
And everybody knows kind of where Aranda sits with the new AD and watching that. So a 1 year deal kind of makes the most sense. It's remarkable because I think back on some of Baylor's. I mean, I think you're a bit younger than I am, but I mean, Odell James was a monster recruit back in the day that they landed in about 96 or 97. Obviously, this guy's different because he's not coming straight from high school. But as you said, he was like up there with the top quarterbacks in the country, depending on what service you use or whatever. And to your point, even if you just see him hanging out at the barbecue, they had some kind of thing like for the alumni. They were actually grilling a bunch of steaks. And I was standing around with some alums, and I remember, and he had that little baby face, but he was already fully formed, kind of a massive dude as like a sophomore or junior in high school. When I talked to his dad, Sam, recently, he was doing some workouts. He was working with that former BYU quarterback, John Beck, I believe is his name. And the thought was, let's lean him up a little bit and let's get him where he can move a little better. Sawyer didn't run this year. I'm sure you noticed that. They just didn't have any threat of the quarterback run, which other teams, that's an enormous threat to have. What do you think he is, DJ, in that area? And how did he do at Florida in that? And do you think maybe that's an area where they're looking to maybe get some more help from him?
Yeah, I think he can. I don't think it's going to be the first thing he does. He is a thrower first, but he certainly can throw on the run. He certainly can move. And I will be interested to see if we do see Jake Spavital use him in the run game in some creative ways, the way he did Sawyer Robertson in 2024. You might remember when Sawyer took that job from DeCon Finn early in the 2024 season, you saw a decent amount of quarterback run game in then. And so not utilizing as much, maybe a little bit of a shift in philosophy. I would be interested to see how much they use him in that way. He doesn't seem to me to be a natural runner in that, in the way that you would think of, like, say, a Johnny Manziel, who Spav coach once upon a time, Texas A&M. He's not that type of scrambler, but he's a big guy with a long stride who when he gets moving, can be hard to bring down and certainly can get you a first down and chew up some yards. I don't think it'll be a major part of his game, but I do think it is something they can use and something he can do.
Does this resonate at all with other players, or is it so much about the almighty dollar now? Everybody's just trying to get theirs. Is there anything about Baylor landing a big name with great pedigree that maybe grabs some players' attention that they might not already have had?
I think money and fit and who you're coached by is priority number one. But when you're comparing similar programs and if all your programs at a transfer or a recruit is considering, if they're all in a similar boat in all those categories, this probably serves as a tiebreaker. Certainly, if you're a receiver that wants to come to Baylor, this helps because receivers want to know what quarterback they're going to play with. And DJ Lagway's name, I think, still carries a lot of respect. It still is very, I think, highly thought of in college football circles, even though it didn't go quite the way we thought it would in his 2 years there. And I do think in the state of Texas, if you are somebody who is from Texas that Baylor's trying to recruit, whether it's a transfer or recruit, he was a big deal here. He was a big deal in the state. People know that name. People know what kind of player he is. He was in a Gatorade ad. I mean, this is a young man who's really been out there in terms of his image and being able to do endorsement and all that stuff. So he's a face and he's a name that people know. So I do think it certainly doesn't hurt Baylor. That's for sure.
Does he remind, when he was coming out and even at Florida, you know, I try to think of like big mobile quarterbacks, and Cam comes to mind, but Cam was even bigger, and Cam was probably more athletic, right? Just from a running standpoint. So that's a tough one because that guy went on to play in a Super Bowl and be an MVP in the NFL. So that's probably not even a fair one. But are there any of these high school kids that you've kind of watched over the years, whether it be Elite 11 or otherwise, that DJ kind of reminds you of it all?
Not really, because very few are built like DJ. You hear a coach say that DJ is almost built like a defensive end.
Yeah,
and he's built. I guess the only one that I would think of that has a similar physical makeup to him is Lenora Sellers at South Carolina. But I think DJ is a much more polished passer than Lenora Sellers is. He's certainly, I think he's a little bit more reliable as a drop back passer than Lenoris. Lenoris is more of a pure runner, like a downhill, just run over guys type of guy. That's really not DJ's game. They're different styles of quarterbacks, but you just don't find players that are of his frame, size, broad shoulder, strength, the whole nine. Like the torque he throws with is just something to watch. And so I don't think he has a lot of comps in his position.
Sam, is anybody, Sam Kahn Jr. with us on the Matt Mosley Show, has anybody other than Tech, which is just, when we've now expect them to just dominate the portal. And because it's kind of like Signetti now when he gets quarterback, you're just like, okay, Hoover's probably going to win the Heisman now. Like he has that kind of credibility. Tech, when they get a defensive lineman, doesn't matter where it's from, right? You're just like, okay, that guy's going to be awesome. That guy will probably have 8 or 9 sacks next season. So and I think Blanchard, and you've documented that team, they deserve that program. Joey, they all deserve, and Cody, a lot of credit for. So they're almost in a different world when it comes to the portal. In the rest of the Big 12, we've seen what Eric Morris is doing. He's doing a Signetti-like thing and bringing a ton of those UNT kids with him. Signetti did that with the JMU kids to help him get a good running start at Indiana. Who of those other teams outside of Tech has kind of impressed you so far in the portal?
Indiana for sure. I think you mentioned Signetti. Indiana's after Tech, I think, is at the top of the list because they got their quarterback. They got Turbo Richard from Boston College, who was the leading rusher there, and they got Nick Marsh, who is an elite receiver, NFL draft type prospect down the road from Michigan State. And then they got a couple really quality edge rushers from Kansas State as well. So Indiana is a team that looks like it's reloading for a run in 2026. So I certainly think they're on that list. Oklahoma State, you mentioned Eric Morris. I think he's done a terrific job because when you hired him at Oklahoma State, I think that was one of the big questions everybody had. And if you're Chad Weiberg, the AD there, you probably have that question as well. Hey, can you bring your quarterback with you? Well, not only did he bring his quarterback, he brought Caleb Hawkins, who was coveted by just about anybody that needed a running back in the portal. Wyatt Young, who was also coveted by a lot of Power 4 programs as a receiver, and about a dozen more guys from that team that went 12-2. So, and it's not to say that, okay, you just import North Texas into Oklahoma State and everything works out, but Oklahoma State was 1-11 last year, and I talked to a GM who said he thought it was one of the worst rosters he had seen in the Power 4. And they need a talent injection, and they still have a lot of holes to fill now. They had 54 guys get in the portal, so they still, even though they got like 20 something now, they still got a long way to go still. But he's off to a good start. I think Texas A&M has quietly had a nice start. They haven't gotten the big splash name, but they've gotten a lot of needs filled. and some, I think, under the radar guys. Anto Saka, the edge rush from Northwestern, they picked up yesterday. I thought that was a terrific addition for them. I thought they've done really well. Cal has done well. I think they've made some waves in the portal. So there's a handful of programs I think that have done well so far. But there's still time to go. There's still a little bit more than a week left with this thing open, and obviously guys have time to still make their decision. Although if you're trying to get them in for the spring semester, there's a little bit of time crunch with your enrollment deadlines and all that. But those are the teams that have stood out to me so far.
All right, in this DeMond Williams situation in Washington, that's been an enormous story that will have a ripple effect on the rest of college football. Are these contracts enforceable? Some think it is. When the Big Ten starts getting behind you, you're like, well, maybe so. But then also, if LSU wants him, LSU is going to fight every battle in the world to get him. How do you see this playing out? Because some of the stuff coming from Coach Fish's wife and others, and now he's parted ways with his agent. It seems like it's pretty messy with Washington, so it's going to be a little hard and awkward going back there if he's somehow forced to return there. Will there be some sort of settlement, buyout? How do you see this thing ending?
Yeah, at this point, it feels like the toothpaste is out of the tube on him going back because, as you said, if you try to force him to stay, I don't know that it ends well for anybody. That said, I would forecast it to work out similarly to the way the Xavier Lucas situation worked out last year when Wisconsin did not want to put him in the portal after he had signed a redshirt deal, and then he ended up basically withdrawing from school and then enrolling at Miami, where he's playing now. I would imagine that if Washington does not put DeMond Williams' name in the portal, then he'll just withdraw, and then he can just transfer like a normal student, which is still within the rules. What the portal does, the requirement to go in the portal is teams are supposed to not contact you unless you're in the portal. Of course, we know tampering is really hard to enforce, and so I'm sure people will find a workaround for that. But that would be how I figure it will work out. Is DeMond will just end up withdrawing if he really wants to leave, and then enroll at the school of his choice. As far as the contracts go, I think you'll see some legal action. Wisconsin and Miami, they had a legal case with the Xavier Lucas situation, so I imagine that will be in play here as well if DeMond Williams ends up leaving. And the part about this that is really, I think, is the part to hone in on, and it's a difficult one to reconcile, is that if there's a buyout on the contract, that certainly needs to be fulfilled. But the issue, one of the key issues is can you write into a contract that someone can't leave when the NCAA bylaw says that if a athlete comes to the school and says, hey, I want to transfer, and gives written notification, they're supposed to put his name in the portal within 48 hours. That is a bylaw on the books. And so then it becomes a question of, can you basically sidestep an NCAA bylaw because you wrote it into a rev share contract? That's probably for legal people to answer. My guess is probably no. But there are also, again, like you said, there's ramifications that if they let him walk without having to fulfill the contract, or at least fulfill the buyout terms, which I think is really important here. I think even if he leaves, he still has to be on the hook for whatever buyout they wrote into it, and I think that's important. But whatever decision is made, as you said, will have an impact on the sport in the long term, because it will set a precedent to a degree for others who want to end up in, or happen to end up in that situation.
All right, and man, loved having you today. Last thing, tonight's game, it's finally here in Miami and Ole Miss. Joe Golding, who I'm sure you've crossed paths with, that was interesting yesterday, his comments. I think he was finally tired of hearing about Lane Kiffin. I thought he gave a really good answer to all that. But this is interesting that Miami has gone from nobody really giving them respect in those first two games to being a 3.5-point favorite. It's like Vegas needed somebody for them to prove it to them, right? And now it's like, oh, wait a second. They do have an unbelievable defense, and they do have an unreal running back in Mark Fletcher Jr. Which way are you leaning in this, and how do you see this playing out? Because while Ole Miss can win shootouts, Miami's going to try to keep that score down. And so we have a very, very fascinating matchup of a high-powered offense versus a great defense.
Yeah, I'm leaning Miami. I just think the way Mario Cristobal has built his team, which is from the inside out, line of scrimmage first, and it shows, I think that wins. That travels. Running game, offensive line play, defensive line play travels, and it wins in the postseason. And I think as long as Miami is smart and they don't get too cute offensively, which I thought they did at times when they played Texas A&M, in that first round game, I thought sometimes they got a little bit away from Mark Fletcher when it was very clear every time you gave him the football, he was getting 12, 14 yards. Like, keep feeding that guy. Against Ohio State, I thought Shannon Dawson did a much better job, was much more disciplined in his game plan, and fed Mark Fletcher. And at the end, Sharmar Brown to close that game out. I just think the defensive front that Miami has, we talked about Texas Tech's defensive line earlier. Miami's got that type of talent on the defensive line. And as long as they play the way they have played the first 2 weeks of the playoff, I just don't see anybody really beating them. I think even if they end up against Indiana, I think it's going to be really, really difficult for the Hoosiers to handle in the final. But I'm picking Miami so long that A, Carson Beck takes care of the ball, B, they run the ball early and often, because I think that defensive front is just a little bit too much for Ole Miss to handle.
Sam, great to have you. Man, look forward to reading whatever you write about the semifinals and then the portal. It never sleeps, does it? And the thing is, you're like, oh, I'm going to be safe till January 2nd, right? No, it started well before that. So you've been right in the middle of all of it, and really enjoy reading everything you're writing. And so I appreciate it. This has been a depressing time for Baylor fans because everybody's left. Which I laughed because I'm like, wait, y'all didn't like this team, and now you're mad that all these players are leaving, right? You're like, they go, wait, why are all these guys leaving? And the basketball team, which usually men's basketball is great at Baylor, that's not looking good. And so to get DJ Lagway, it's like everybody can walk outside again and make eye contact with people, and put on the
Hope springs eternal.
Put on the Sailor Bear.
I know, good to watch DJ this year for sure.
All right, Sam, I'll be in touch with you. I appreciate you, man.
Thanks so much. Take care. Have a good one.
You bet. There you go. Sam Kahn Jr. from The Athletic. It was he and Bruce Feldman who kind of teamed up to help. A lot of people were in on this story, but he and Bruce were very early to the game on this, and he's monitored Lagway since he was a sophomore, junior in high school, and wrote the big story on The Athletic. It's up right now. I encourage you to read it. He and Bruce Feldman wrote the initial story about the signing of DJ Lagway. And, he said kind of what I was saying earlier in the show, which is, yeah, maybe not the number 1 or 2 quarterback in the portal from just a ranking standpoint or projections. But if you're talking about like the most impressive looking dude, and the one that has like a ton of upside still, I don't think that's been wasted or that's ended at Florida. His story is still being written. And by the way, we'll see what happens at Baylor. But when you're 6'3", 230, and you have this kind of arm and this kind of athleticism, you are going to have chances in the NFL. And Spavital has a history of getting enormous numbers out of his quarterbacks. And I know it wasn't the year we had all hoped for from Sawyer Robertson, but he still threw for like close to the most yards in all of college football. They didn't play in a bowl game, and I forget how all that worked stats-wise, but he was right up there with the top yardage of anybody. And Sam just predicted that he will throw for more than 3,000 yards next season. Also interesting to hear him say he thinks the deal's probably in the $1.5 to $2 million range. We'll get that interview out there. We'll archive that and get it out there on YouTube and everywhere so y'all can see that. And, on Spotify and Apple, all the different places where you might follow our podcast.